Friday afternoon, folks, 4 o'clock, more or less, plus or minus, close enough for government work. Ted Ralston here, your host on our show ThinkTech on ThinkTech Hawaii, Where the Road Leads. And today the road leads through the Boy Scout Makahiki, which is taking place tomorrow at Ala Moana Park, all the way to drones. And drones will be featured in a small degree there to a large degree here on our show today. Welcoming our first guest, Chuck Devaney, graduate student at UH, soon to be graduated student at UH, and then on the lam looking for a way to take the next step in his career. Chuck's been a frequent flyer on this program. Welcome back, Chuck.
Thank you, Ted.
And we'll be joined by Dale Tietz and Matt Kobayashi, also associated with UH, in a bit after this first section. But anyway, Chuck's been on this show for probably over a year and a half, maybe, I would guess, in various times with a lot of equipment on the table.
Yep.
It's the first time you've been here without any equipment on the table.
I know, the table
Chuck,
looks very clean.
Don't you feel, is this like a measure of your imminent graduation? You're moving away from drones or something?
Yeah,
or?
Exactly. I'm going to have to move away from drones and start thinking about getting a real job.
Okay, real job. That's a really important part here. Real jobs, drones, and Hawaii, and tying them all together. You've been working disaster management, disaster relief, and this sort of thing for since I met you in this game. What do you see happening, Chuck, in the last year or so in terms of the appreciation of the use of drones in disaster operations?
Well, there's become a huge appreciation for it. I've actually had the opportunity to kind of be a part of that growth and see it happen and sort of advise people as to what the best practices may or may not be in disaster response. So you remember the big hurricane in the Philippines a little over a year ago, Typhoon Haiyan. A lot of lessons were learned there. A lot of lessons were learned. There was quite a few of us that ran around and took a lot of imagery and showed the people how to use it and how to interpret it into useful information.
How have those lessons been captured and taken forward?
Well, you know about the UAVators.
Yeah, you can tell us about that a bit more.
Okay, so, all right, so basically, a lot of people have come together, you know, through the use of the internet and whatnot, and we've been able to identify 1,000 drone pilots. 1,000? 1,000 registered drone pilots.
Which means 4,000 drones, because each one's got 4 drones.
Exactly. They're mostly multi-rotor pilots, but they can get a camera in the air nonetheless. And this is globally. So this has been organized into the Humanitarian UAV Network, which has been recognized now by the World Bank. We've been able to assemble a meeting at the United Nations.
So it's got credentials.
It does definitely have credentials. And now we're starting to see more and more big players coming into it, you know, bringing their toys. For example, Facebook. They were one of the first responders to the Nepal incident recently. But still, with the UN and the World Bank kind of paying the bills, they get to actually make the final choice as to who the players are. So now we're seeing perhaps maybe a little bit too much help.
So is UAVators actually deploying forces forward when there's a situation?
We are pretty much consulting and advising as to what the best type of equipment to use and who to go with.
Does that
the final answer does not lie with us.
Does this suggest that sort of an operations manual or something like that in terms of data architecture and imagery analysis might emerge?
I believe so.
Setter?
I believe so. I think some of it might be in my master's thesis.
Oh, all right, okay.
But in terms of like safety and precautions and acknowledgement of local municipalities and the people and respect and ethics and all that stuff, that's all been written into, you know, our code of conduct for the Humanitarian UAV Network.
Is that available somewhere?
It is online. Go to humanitarianUAVnetwork.org.
Humanitarian UAV Network.
Yep.
Okay.
I believe that's what it is, or uavators.net.
So this is sort of a user's perspective, an operator's perspective of what is the best way to use systems like this in the case of somewhat disconnected and disheveled life.
Yeah.
The circumstances that happen after.
Right. Well, you don't know what anything is anymore.
So you establish standards that can operate still in that kind of a unpredictable format.
Right, and you gotta kind of be a little bit of a, you know, a soldier when you go in there. You can't, you know, assume that you're going to have a room at the Hilton when you get there. You're gonna run into all kinds of problems probably with your equipment, charging batteries, and that's all something that you need to consider. So Vanuatu happened, right? Hurricane blows through there, 3 teams were deployed. Funded by the World Bank, advised by the Humanitarian UAV Network. They got there, and some of the reports that I got is that some of those guys had gotten pretty rattled over there. They got pretty rattled by what they saw.
You mean they just weren't trained to handle the emotional situation,
Exactly, the
that
whole
circumstance they fell into?
psychological side of it and stuff like that. So when you're coming into a
Well, there's a
disaster,
message there that has to be brought into the training, right? That
Right.
kind of awareness for
Yeah.
triage situations.
Right, it's kind of like being a fireman or an ambulance driver.
For those of us who don't do that, it
Right.
can be a bit of a
Yeah,
shock.
you're gonna see lots of area, you're gonna cover a lot of ground, but you're not gonna see it in its probably prime state.
Interesting. Interesting that you mentioned that the groups are consolidating, coming together, sharing information, bottling the information, and modifying it as time goes on. Because Mark and I were just down at the AVUSI earlier this week in Atlanta. And that same kind of an attitude was beginning to be expressed by the FAA and the professional organizations that are watching over the technical development of UAVs. The words standards, the words RTCA, the things that the underwriter's laboratory type thinking is starting to show up in the discussions. So both on the product side and now on the user side, and somewhere in between is the operational side, some form of standards are starting to, standards of good behavior in effect are starting to emerge, because I tell you it is absolutely necessary that that happen. We got such a clutter of different kinds of systems and different understandings of the operations, and
Different ways to process imagery, different ways to disseminate the imagery. There is no standard, really. It's just kind of like fly by the seat of your pants when you get there. We're just gonna do the best we can to get the information out. And a lot of times that information is proprietary, so you're not able to just give it away. The locals get to have it first.
so you gotta have security on the information,
then you're gonna
and you have to have
security.
latency control on it.
Absolutely. When you know, somebody's vulnerable in a weakened state, the people that choose to wreak havoc will continue to wreak havoc amongst those people. And if they have information that will help them do that, then they will
At
certainly
least it's
use
good
it.
to know that we have the standards beginning to show up.
Yeah.
I'm really, quite frankly, surprised that we have that, because typically the operators and the users are the last to be coordinated with in this kind of an operation. The engineers come in first in terms of a product set like UAVs. But they don't think in terms of the operations of the user. So we got some
Yeah, they're very specific.
operational standardization coming into the game, and that's going to be useful to drive the regulators and to drive the
Right.
designers of systems.
Two guys in a truck, Ted, remember that whole concept?
I like that idea, man. Two guys in a truck.
It hasn't really, I mean. it's-
Robust and simple.
Yeah, simple, you have a multi-rotor, so you can do your VTOL.
Two guys in a truck, screwdriver simple,
Mm-hmm,
toss it in the air and it flies, returns,
mm-hmm.
and it does the job for you.
Yep. And you have enough power to be able to be spinning your CPU so you can be processing some decent imagery at the same time.
And we don't have to have
Why not?
and it works in the rain.
And it works in the rain and polar regions.
You know, again, at AVUSI, I think we saw, again, a gigantic clutter. It's not negative, it just, there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of different systems. We probably saw
People
500.
are really platform happy.
Exactly. We saw 500 platforms at least, and they're anywhere from standard cruciform airplanes to quad rotors to multi-rotors to hybrids that have props on the ends of the wingtips and props that fold into the wingtips. And,
Yeah, all the VTOL stuff. Yeah.
Stuff that lands on the water, goes underwater. There was even one called a bowling ball. It was basically imagine a large beach ball, okay, but instead of having a skin on it, the thing is made out of a matrix of bamboo sticks. Inside is the flight navigation system, a large prop, and some cameras or whatever the other sensors might be. And you basically just turn the thing on and throw it up in the air.
Yeah.
And it beach balls its way up into the sky, and when you're done with the mission, it lands somewhere, and it kind of rolls around until it stops rolling. It's, if it goes...
Super protective.
Totally. And
yeah, it's a great idea.
People aren't going to get hurt. It loses a lot of performance because you have all the pressure, the drag associated with all the
And it's probably
matrix
super
work.
lightweight.
Yeah, lightweight. It's probably, you can probably repair it easily
Right.
in the field.
Right.
But you can put it inside a building, and you're not worry about running into the
Walls
damaging
and
it
stuff.
or damaging the structure. So
Yeah, I like
anyway,
the idea,
things
but I
that-
mean, that's exactly it. So it can be a large golden egg that we hurl into space and it takes pictures, but you know what it really boils down to is what kind of information are you dealing with in the end, and is it usable?
You know, the other thing we're facing here, I think, and you brought it up, is that the internet is driving a lot of this. The internet breaks down barriers and boundaries in people, in
communications like that.
societies, and in geography. So the solution's being evolved at a global frame of reference. And that's probably something we've never seen before. So
That's why it was so easy to actually organize the way we did with this whole entire humanitarian UAV network, you know. The lessons were learned between Haiti and the Philippines, people really started to catch on and see this application being very
was
viable.
UAV part of the humanitarian network? Is
Yeah,
that
it's
where
kind
it
of the
came
same
from?
deal.
Is there
Yeah,
the-
you and I are both on the advisory board. I
realize
don't know
that.
if you knew that or not.
I'm on the AV board of, I know that of, UAVs.
Yeah,
But
so-
I really hadn't paid much attention to the
Well,
humanitarian network.
Patrick's been working hard on organizing this, you know. When something happens out there, Patrick doesn't sleep for 2-3 days, and he's usually traveling, you know.
Is he in Nepal still, or did he come back?
He didn't go to Nepal. Nobody, both me, or myself and Dries were both getting ready to go to Nepal because we're probably the most able-bodied. We don't have a lot of fixed-wing pilots, but what, you know, like, we can advise the World Bank or the United Nations or whomever is going to fund the response. We can advise it, but they, you know, what it really boils down to is what they choose. And
So in the last couple of years, you've seen a lot of consolidation coming forth, at least in thinking,
Mhm.
and in a sort of a systems approach to working the value statement, the value proposition of the UAVs. What do you think the next 2 or 3 or 10 years are going to hold?
That's a good question. Are you talking specifically maybe about the humanitarian world or about the whole ball of wax?
The whole ball of wax.
Well, we're here in Hawaii. We really haven't tapped our potential as of yet. We're one of the 6 test sites, but I'm not sure how that's moving forward. So I would assume that sometime within the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see a COA across the state of Hawaii, or at least the island of Oahu.
COA being a
not a COA.
certificate of
Maybe I'm using the wrong terminology because it's really confusing to me, some of the FAA stuff. 333 exemption across the state.
That would be the way to do it, right?
Right. So that obviously has to happen. We need some applications, and we definitely need some consolidation and some self-governance here. We talked about all of this stuff yesterday. I think it's better if we sort of self-regulate ourselves and then kind of apply that to, you know, whatever efforts we need to make as they make the rules here in the state of Hawaii and
How about the whole world of imagery analysis and extrapolation and extraction from the imagery?
Well, we're going to see sensors getting smaller.
That's where it matters at the end of the day, right?
Heck yeah. So it's going to be cheaper to process it. We're going to see a lot more open source applications. I would imagine there are some in the photogrammetry world. They're a little bit cumbersome to use, you know, and piece together, but they work pretty well. So I can see prices kind of coming down, hopefully on things like Pix4D or PhotoScan. Commercial and educational licenses. We're going to see different sensors being able, you know, that we're going to be able to use because they're smaller and they're going to be more affordable. You know, we really haven't even tried a LiDAR system on any of our birds, but we would all love to. We haven't tried a hyperspectral system on any of our birds, but we would like to. But you know, the price is so lofty, and every time you go to fly one of these things over the water, you just
You don't want to lose it.
Yeah, you don't want to lose that.
But how about the software? Is the software tied to the sensor technology? Is that our structure from motion software systems tied to a particular recording system? How about LiDAR analysis systems? Are they?
That would be done differently. You would deal with the LiDAR differently than the imagery. So the structure from motion is basically using it almost like a set of stereo pairs. And then you're finding these tie points within each of the images that will define a point in 3D space, and they're down samples, so you're not going to see all the texture. Once you agree on that first initial SFM process happening, then you can densify everything, get a dense point cloud, and then that's when you're going to actually see.
So there's an order to the processing as well as.
Yeah, there's 5 steps in SFM. It's in my thesis.
So it's I've got to read your thesis. Chuck, you have to make your thesis available to all the folks watching this.
Yeah,
I need to read your
$35. I think it's going to get better. I think, and then more and more people are going to be using it.
Yeah, I was going to say, others picking up on that. I mean, your thesis will go a long way towards helping people think about that, I would presume.
Here, you know, we've got Resource Mappers Hawaii that have tried all the different ones that are available. We're starting to see a little bit more use of the open source VSFM and CMPMVS in academia here in Hawaii. But like Matt Barbie, for example, just picked up a copy of PhotoScan, and he's running that and liking the results. So now what we need, now that we have these software suites out there, and they're making these beautiful 3D images, and they're super sexy, we need to find out how accurate they are, And most importantly, we need to find out what kind of error we're dealing with.
And let's think about this. We also need to know how useful they are to the incident commanders and the people making the decisions in the field.
Yes.
And in the rear area. Let's
Aloha.
pick that up, that discussion, how we're going to push that all the way forward through the entire analysis chain when we get back from our first break here.
Okay.
Aloha, I'm Hunter Hevlin, host of Sustainable Hawaii here at ThinkTech Hawaii. You can tune in every week on Thursday at 2 p.m. to see interviews with sustainability professionals from around the state and even further abroad, learning about activities with water management, food security, waste management, and a whole host of other fascinating opportunities to get engaged with making a greener island. So if you're interested in making the transition from consuming individuals to communities of producers, check us out every Thursday.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen. I host Likeable Science on ThinkTech Hawaii. And I do this because I care about science literacy in Hawaii. I want to spread the understanding that science is a vital and interesting part of everyone's life. I want to make sure the broadest possible spectrum of people understand the beauty and the value of science and realize that science plays out each and every day of their lives. I want you to understand that science is fun. So we bring onto this show each week guests who are scientists, from astronomers to zoologists, and we talk about what they do and how they do it. But most importantly, we talk about why you should care about their work, why you should see that their work has value and impact on your life. So I hope you'll join us Fridays, 1 p.m. here on ThinkTech Hawaii. You can watch us via live stream. You can watch us recorded on Olelo, and you can see us each week. We hope you'll join us.
Inspired by an ancient culture, classical Chinese dance, vigorous physicality, timeless stories, 5,000 years of Chinese music and dance, Shen Yun presents authentic Chinese culture. Coming to Blaisdell Concert Hall, May 8th and 9th. Tickets at shenyun.com or call 808-792-3919.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Friday afternoon, we're back live here in the ThinkTech Hawaii studios. Ted Ralston, Where the Road Leads, and our guest today is, as he has been several times before, many times before, is Chuck Devaney, soon to be graduated student Chuck Devaney at UH in geography and many other integrated interests.
Yes.
So we're just talking before the break about the incredible expansion in available technology, useful and available to the first responders and the people right at the front of the disaster management scene in some levels of exotic imagery projection that you couldn't even have found in a movie theater 10 years ago. And they're now available through basically downloaded free software.
Yep.
And so the interesting question to me is, as we bring that analytical capability forward into the product stream that drones create in the case of humanitarian assistance, how do we educate the users of that information, that is the Red Cross, the incident commander, the people who have to make decisions, how to use that level of that type of information that they've never seen before?
Well, first thing is I would want to sit down at a table with them, similar to like we are right now, and ask them what they need, what their requirements are. You know, FEMA's got their requirements. That's kind of what I based my thesis analysis on, is what FEMA requires in the event of a disaster, mostly floods, that sort of thing. So that was the framework for which I worked within. So Red Cross might have their own, or maybe they'll adhere to theirs, or you know, whatever response, World Food Bank, whatever, whoever would have any sort of response what do they need in terms of their information, in terms of the information that they need? Is the building damaged or is it not? Is the bridge there or is it not? You might be able to tier that into different levels of the response. You know, immediately, what kind of information do we have to have in the first 18 to 24 hours of?
But to some
the
extent,
disaster?
that's looking in the rearview mirror, because that's based on what imagery they've had before,
Yeah.
available either
Right.
provided by the military
Right.
or satellites at 1 meter resolution, something like that, a day later. Now we're giving them the ability to see three-dimensional renderings in centimeter scale resolution
Yeah.
in 20 minutes. So what they need may change when they see what they can get.
Exactly.
So we need as a workshop here of some kind between the supply side, that is you and the folks who generate the information, and the user side, which is police and fire and DNLR and Board of Water Supply and those folks who use this, and HECO.
Yeah.
And maybe we should make a day of that. That would be a pretty cool thing to do,
Well,
wouldn't
we
it?
could do it similar to how we did it when we were in the Philippines. So we set up that whole demo
Yeah.
day at the Officers Club or whatever, and then we flew a mission, and all of a sudden, voila, we had an output, and it changed the way that they were going to be thinking about
I
it.
think we have to do that here. I think just thinking about it, if we had, for the folks on TV who weren't at our workshop meeting in UH yesterday, we got about half the people who are involved in this drone-based technology explosion at UH together and
What
talked
about that class you're doing with NTPTC?
That's a little bit more structured, but I think to get to what the structure ought to be, we ought to do this workshop you're talking about. I think that's a great idea. Could you come up with half a dozen people who can express the types of information and show how that is done and how it's pulled together and what level of training is necessary? I mean, could you think of like a trade show where that would be done, and then we'd have the users come by and take a look at what can be done, have them vote on what makes sense to them and what doesn't?
Yeah, I think so. I'm sure that we could do something like that. We would probably want to do it someplace where we have ample parking for a lot of people to show up, and the
We
fire
should do
department
that.
show up.
I wonder who would be the agency or the organization that would be putting that on, besides you and I, who are going to be in the middle of it anyway. But maybe that's an outreach
State
function.
civil defense?
How about an outreach function at the university?
Yeah, we can.
And then reach
Well,
out to
they
the-
can.
Yeah, they can. No longer you, right? After.
Yeah, I put in my time.
When do you lose your office there?
2 weeks, I'm out.
We got to get this done in 2 weeks? No, that's just.
No, I mean, I'll be somewhere, but I just won't be there.
I think that may be a follow-on to yesterday's meeting. Here's what we can do in terms of the extractable imagery and information extraction. And let the users all kind of seance through it, as they did yesterday to a small degree, and give us a working set in between that's maybe not as grand and as exotic as we can prepare, but a lot more than they're getting today. It would be a nice place to start.
Yeah, maybe like when we did that one building,
Yeah.
do a pass and then have them, take that imagery, put it into the computer, have them do it hands-on and see how easy it is to get that particular output.
What Chuck's talking about is an experiment we did in the Philippines at a burned out large structure. I don't know if it was a dining hall or what it was, but it was a big gigantic concrete structure all burned out. And we did a 2 or 3 minute flight with the Instant Eye, and
Yep.
then you sat down on the ground and 20 minutes later processed the imagery through to get a full 3D fly-through image set of that burned out structure, so that anybody who wanted to understand, like an architect, could quickly look through that on his computer 4,000 miles away and determine where there's likely damage to be in the structure.
Or
something
where
like that.
people are trapped.
Right. And so that, if the using community was used to that type of information, they could have done something with that. I took that same image over here to some responders, I won't mention who they are, here in town, and said, hey, we have an opportunity here to put this kind of information forward. What do you think? And I had also run it through a straightforward mosaicing process and just did simple pictures. They looked at the two, three-dimensional going over here and just one piece over here. They actually picked the older simple system because they had never even seen that. And they said, this other thing is too exotic for me. So there's probably a level of exoticness that we have to, although we can see, we need to work with our peers in the responding community and find where their point of acceptance is of of information that can allow them to do their job better.
I think
Anyway,
you just defined a psychology paper.
I think we did, right, yeah. And how the intersection of psychology and technology.
Yeah,
right, in this
computer
case.
vision, all of it.
Yeah, oh, computer vision, my God, wouldn't that be something?
Yeah.
I mean, you could, and so again, in 10 years, isn't this gonna be an exciting field to be in? And
You're gonna be able to like visualize some sort of cartographic representation with a pair of glasses out in space.
and all the middlemen like us.
And you'll be able to touch it
out
and
of
move it around.
So this is really interesting. So we have some social obligations here, Chuck, coming out of this to actually do
True,
what we
yeah,
were
there's
talking
some,
about.
yeah, definitely. I think, you know, especially in this realm, you know, the drone realm and search and rescue, how that whole thing comes together. Yeah, I mean, that's always been part of the deal, is to, you know, make sure that we're stewards of that methodology.
And when we do that, that'll continue to focus on the value of drones as really the imagery they generate and the information they generate, way more than just the flying skyhook that carries a sensor around. Something.
Exactly, and I love that that's how it's kind of become, because, yeah, we do have a flooded market full of,
Just a little?
yeah,
Yeah.
of tons and tons of options for things that fly that we can attach a camera
Now,
to.
and on that account, I was struck also at the USI conference that there is discussion coming around, I think I mentioned in the first section a little bit, about standardization in the design and the certification and the, you know, the beyond line of sight operation as such. Those things are, as they're getting more exotic, more complicated, and especially as we get into the beyond line of sight, there has to be a standard that recognizes safety and reliability. Safety primarily, but reliability is one of the components within that. So we're starting to hear those terms being mentioned, starting to hear people talk about that. In fact, there's going to be a conference at the end of July up at NASA Ames that's going to start fragmenting out the components that'll take us to that point. I don't know. We're going so much these days. We got to stop going because we're
Right.
going too much.
How's retirement, Ted?
Timing. Well, you'll get there someday, Chuck. So anyway, standardization, recognizing the value at the user level, and what you're talking about, the internet allowing the people to come together to share these ideas is a whole realm of development we've never seen in a technical product before. Airplanes didn't come through that means. Airplanes came through a bunch of guys in the back room, and then did the job and put it forward, but it was no sharing concept of any kind. This thing
Right.
is totally shared, so it's owned by the world.
Right.
The whole concept of intellectual property is almost
I know.
a bit of a challenge here.
Yep. I know, especially in the open source, right? So, I mean, we
Yeah.
build all of our own stuff, pretty much. We're all using open source technology, but I feel like, you know, sometimes our planes, you know, thanks to IAM, are superior to others sometimes. But we can't patent that design because everything's done from open source, which, you know, is not at all problematic.
So how does
But-
open source work? Somebody's got to get paid for their time unless they're
Hardware,
retired.
the hardware.
Okay, selling the hardware that it contains that open source software.
Yeah, and then, you know, now that hardware has become off the shelf, ready to fly quadcopter units. So there's another revenue stream. And then you still have the components. So that's probably where most of it comes from. In terms of like the software development that happens, I don't know how they're getting paid, or even if they are getting paid.
And this
you
is
know.
a percentage of the basic hardware price.
Yeah, I would.
Dollars
I would
per
guess so.
pound.
Yeah, I would guess so. But going back to the standardization and how we're going to move forward, and when we're going to see more and more people that are going to have access to this technology, and whether or not they're going to be safe and reliable when they do so, we really need to be able to identify what those regulations are going to be for all of that and the certification process.
And that's
Including for myself, I don't know what that looks like.
And that's a really complicated issue. It's actually getting simpler as time goes on here. The FAA has released, as you know, the NPRM, Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, for under 55 pounds, which isn't small in my mind. 55-pound airplane
Such a
is
huge
150,000
difference between that
pounds.
and a 7-pounder like what we have.
Yeah, I mean, 55 pounds is $150,000 to start with. That's what it's going to cost.
Yeah,
That's
that's
not-
55 pounds of metal and fury,
And batteries.
batteries
And,
and spinning blades.
So regardless of how they got to that level, there's 100 knots, 500 feet, 55 pounds. The rules for that are out in review right now. And perhaps a year and a half from now, and I think they said middle of 2017 or something, you might see some rules coming forward. But the rules are very forgiving in regard to how the FAA rules have been stated in the past. They're all what are called performance-based rules. you will be safe. Well, how do you measure safety? How do you know if you have enough safety? When do you stop making safety? Where do you bolt safety on if you had some?
Where do you manufacture it?
Where do you manufacture something like that? Right. You build it into the main frame, or do you stick it on as an applique on the outside? So that whole concept is foreign to the way the FAA has been raised and thinking. So I do believe we're going to see what's called an AC, or advisory circular, coming out fairly soon that takes us the first direction in how to work that. But we've got to re-educate a lot of people in order to apply that type of thinking and logic to the design of these systems. But your point is, I really like the fact that you brought the point up. We've got to get to some form of standardization and safety and reliability to make these systems useful in the larger sense.
And then in terms of like the certification, does that mean that the person that is the fixed wing pilot, is he going to be in the same category as somebody who flies a DJI Phantom? You know, and is that going to cross over to be the same way? So that person who's certified and he owns a DJI Phantom, is he going to be able to be turned loose with a fixed wing with an hour's worth of batteries? You know,
that's a really good question.
40-kilometer range. You know, those are some things that concern me a little bit too. I think that you have to be able to show that you're competent with your equipment somehow.
That's probably going to go back to this whole concept of performance-based regulations.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the system is, are you competent with it and safe with it, independent of how it's actually built?
Right.
That'll be how that will.
Yeah,
have to
that'll
play out.
really help with the you know, how strong our industry stays. You know, how sustainable it's going to be. You know, is it going to stay alive, or only a few of us going to be able to utilize the technology?
And then we have the 1.5, is it a 4.5 pound or less, that are going to be basically the micro class, which is going to have just about no criteria, self-certifying everything. And as we get closer to, as the future approaches, we get more into miniaturization, that 4.5 pound class is going to pick up a lot of significance, because you can pack a lot of capability into a 4.5 pound system, especially 10 years from now.
Oh yeah.
And,
I mean, they're already cutting the size of the autopilots in half.
Really?
And jamming it with 3 times the amount of capability.
We saw some batteries down in AVUSI that are 3 times as power density capable as LiPo batteries, 3 times. So anyway, that boundary of 4.5 pounds is going to contain the equivalent of a 20-pound aircraft today in 10 years. A lot of capability. And once again, there's going to be no criteria, no requirements for the piloting of it or the design of it or any of that. So it's once again, a situation where the technology is outpacing the ability of the regulators to catch up with it and put regulations forth, other than the most simple performance regulation of all: be safe.
Be safe.
And
fly smart.
Yeah.
Don't hang it over people's heads.
Yeah, so stay away. Don't fly over people. Don't fly over gatherings of public events of any kind. By the way, anybody watching this who's a drone person, stay away from the lantern floating ceremony at on Memorial Day.
I think you get arrested immediately.
Oh, there's going to be some action in that one. And but going back to the bottom line or top line here, we really, with all this activity going on, we need a place in Hawaii, or places on each island, where it sort of collects and centralizes and can let scholastic and academics come together.
Yep.
In some way, a melting pot, a sharing point of some kind that becomes an accelerator, becomes a advocacy point, becomes one of these innovation centers. You know,
like a makerspace, but for drones.
Yeah, makerspace, but yeah.
Or UAVs, whatever we're calling them now.
Yeah, good point. You know, I just can't believe we're going to call them drones.
We called them drones all day yesterday.
Yeah, we did. We sure did, in front of a
freely,
pretty
openly
audience. So I guess, folks, from this point on, there'll be drones.
Yep.
But in speaking of that, you mentioned Makers Fair. Tomorrow is the Makers Fair at Ilani, and all those who want to see a lot of these drones in action, and not just drones, but every form of technology that you can imagine. Makers Fair is at 9 to 12 at Ilani, open to the public. And there'll be a sort of a different form of Makers Fair. It's the Boy Scout Makihiki down at Ala Park at, I think it's 9 to 3 tomorrow. So there'll be a lot of opportunities to see some of these things in play. Flying drones will be at Ilani, static displays at Ala. And with that, We never seem to have enough time to get even anywhere close to the major subjects in the drone world, and the drone world changes as fast as we can get people back on the show. So we'll look forward to getting you back on in another month or so here, Chuck.
Okay.
And I'm sure the horizon will be altogether different at that point.
I'm sure
But,
we'll definitely find something else to talk
Well,
about.
certainly I know one thing that'll be different. You'll be a graduated student,
I
not
will
a
have-
grad student.
Is it this way or this way? I forget.
I have no clue. And maybe even employed, right?
Possibly, yeah.
All right. Okay. So drone pilot Chuck Devaney, international man of mystery in the drone world, and critical member of UAViators and the Humanitarian UAV Network, and soon-to-be graduated student at UH. Thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you, Ted.
And,
You've been there since the beginning, the very
Trying
first
to.
day.
And we'll get the story on drones back on again when ThinkTech Hawaii's Where the Road Leads back to drones in about a month. Thank you, everybody.